So I'm going to use this time to talk about the OHDSI Phenotype Library, the 2022 refresh. So as you all know, the Phenotype Library has been a long-standing effort of the OHDSI community. And as of 2022, there is a responsible work group. This work group, an OHDSI work group called the Phenotype Development Evaluation Work Group, has made this their OKR to release an initial operational framework on how individual contributors may collaborate and use the OHDSI Phenotype Library resource by July 2022. So in this, I'm going to talk about this initial framework. This framework was discussed in the forums and also by the work group, and the work group has approved this for consideration. As part of this effort, the following resources were made available to the community. One is an Atlas instance. This is at atlas-phenotype.odyssey.org. Everybody inside OHDSI can go to the forums and register for read-only access to this Atlas instance. This is a security-enabled Atlas that will have good quality cohort definitions that has gone through some of our best practices. There is a repository, GitHub repository that is conformant with Hades. Martijn is going to talk about Hades software. So if a cohort definition is published inside this GitHub repository, an R package called Phenotype Library, it is now usable by other Hades packages. There is a network study called Phenotype Library Diagnostics. Data partners will be requested to partner and execute this study on their data and the results and contribute the results back to the community. Those results will be made available in a results viewer. The URL will be data.odyssey.org/phenotype library. It is currently not live. It is expected to go live in August 2022. The rest of the resources are currently live. So I want to talk about the responsible work group. As you know, the Phenotype Development Evaluation Work Group has been around for some time with a stated mission. That work group meets every second and the fourth Friday at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time in the US. Please come and join us in this work group. The responsibilities of this work group are, for this particular OKR, has been defined as to define the minimum standards for phenotypes in the Phenotype Library, to manage a community submission process, to perform scientific peer review in a public forum, publish and maintain the OHDSI Phenotype Library repository of cohort definitions, execute OHDSI Phenotype Library network study and publish the results, develop the material for peer-reviewed scientific publications on these phenotypes. So what does it mean by community submissions? The work group deliberated and has come up with these rules. Submission is complete if it has a clinical description. We spent a considerable amount of time in Phenotype February to define what clinical description is. It should have the required sections, and those sections should be posted on forums.odyssey.org. It should have the segments overview, presentation, assessment plan, prognosis, disqualifiers, strengtheners, logic description. And we will detail that more in a different conversation. There's a segment called literature review. As part of our OHDSI best practices, we require that a literature review is performed to see if a phenotype algorithm has already been evaluated by another organization and to see what we can learn from those. There's a segment called logic description. The logic description is a translation of the human understandable clinical description into a structured form that could then be translated into a rule-based phenotype, such as that in the Atlas tool. We request the submission of cohort definitions, one or two of the best cohort definitions that have gone through the phenotype development evaluation iteration process, the best practices. We require the publishing of a cohort diagnostic output on one or more data sources, and those outputs should be publicly available, such as data.odyssey.org. We also recommend the use of eValuate and other evaluation or validation metrics wherever possible. We then require the discussion of the submitter's evaluation or validation findings on the forums. This should have insights on sensitivity, specificity, and index date misclassification errors. We also have defined a technical object called an cohort definition set object that allows us allows the core definitions to be contributed to the phenotype library. Now that there is a submission, and once these requirements are met, a submission goes through the following process. The work group will set up a peer review process. The first step is to import those definitions into Atlas phenotype.ohdsi.org. When those core definitions are imported, it gets assigned a cohort ID. Those cohort ID becomes permanent. It's immutable. It does not change. And so it's got the similar idea of an OMAP concept ID. A volunteer peer reviewer from the community will be asked to review the submission. That will also be done publicly. We'll create a rubric for the reviewer, which includes things like, is the clinical description clear? Does it have the essential components? Does the logic description align with the clinical description? Does the code definition match the logic description? Is the evaluation that is reported by the submitter observable in the code diagnostic output? Is the evaluation valid in terms of the sensitivity errors, specificity errors, and index date misclassification? Are there other validation estimates like the p-evaluator output? And their personal recommendations, do they recommend it to be accepted? Can it be used in a study, or has it been used in a study? Once the peer has reviewed it and recommended for acceptance, the work group is now responsible for acceptance and promotion. This is the managerial task of taking the core definition and making it available in the GitHub repository. That GitHub repository Hades package will be version controlled, so it's now referenceable. The IDs are guaranteed to stay the same and are immutable, so they can be referenced in an OHDSI study or in another OHDSI package. And it can also be referenced in an external publication. And the work group will continue its scientific work. It will continue to use this experience to promote OHDSI best practices, to publish OHDSI best practices, to make these core definitions referenceable, and also to create a referenceable article that can be used in other OHDSI studies regarding phenotype development and evaluation. Next, I think Beebs, you wanted to talk about the upcoming work group.
Yes.
Important.
Yes, thank you. So this announcement follows pretty directly from what Gowtham was speaking about, the Phenotype Development and Evaluation Work Group. So during the US Symposium on Sunday, October 16th from 1 to 5 p.m. is the activity associated with this work group. And this is the proposal for what we're going to do. The main goal is that we're going to extend the terrific work that was done by some members of the community during Phenotype February. And the idea is that we would like to formalize the process by which computable phenotypes are developed, evaluated, and importantly, validated. And the background here is really that the established status quo gold standard validation studies that are currently being done are of incredibly immense value, but really have limitations given the current observational research context that we're in of large, disparate, distributed database networks covering very heterogeneous populations across the world. This current validation approach generally assesses one phenotype in one data source or one study population at a time, which gives us nice results with high internal validity, but they're of questionable external validity. This involves manual chart review by a clinical expert, which really limits the number of case adjudications that can be possible during a single validation study. So we end up with these nice high quality results, but it's really, really time and resource intensive. They generally assess cases only, which gives us positive predictive values, but it's often at it lacks negative predictive value or sensitivity. The validation metrics that we get from these approaches are often applied to external and possibly non-applicable study populations. And this is problematic given that we know measurement error correction is highly sensitive to measurement error accuracy and applicability. It's really not well understood how these measurement errors transport across populations. So This presents us with a really massive opportunity, in my opinion, and I hope some of you will agree with this. The OHDSI community has the people, the data, and the tools to really advance validation to solve some of these problems. And we'd like to invite, interested participants and data holders to participate in this workshop where we'll introduce a two-part OHDSI validation approach, which is a combination of comprehensive clinical characterization, which some of you might recognize as the tool cohort diagnostics, and then secondly, the probabilistic reference standard validation approach, which many of you will know as pHEValuator. So we'd like to invite people to participate in the development of a method for rapid phenotype development, evaluation, and validation that really scales across a data network. And we're going to ask participants to, in advance, to run a small study package that will validate an established phenotype in their own data. And we invite you to come and report the results and interpret and review with us all during this workshop. And we hope that you will join us. And I'm going to add some of this background information and some ways to get involved on the forums in the next little while. But I hope that this has whet your appetite a little bit. And if you've got any questions about the goals, background, or opportunities here, feel free to contact me.